Okay, hello and welcome again to a new episode of the KewCast. I'm John, joined again by my good friend Eddie. How are you doing?
All right.
Just okay?
Yeah. 25% good, so I'm here.
Right.
It's good enough.
25% good. I'm 75% good, so
hey,
we're balanced.
No, I'm good.
So we've got a good show today. So we're going to talk about the lifetime ball. You're sitting right behind you there, and we're going to talk about the 75% rule, the new in or out rule from PPA.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about a couple other things, mostly paddles of the week. So today we're hitting with the Selkirk. I said that again.
Been doing it all day.
Dang it. The Selkirk Vanguard Pro Invicta. We're going to have a showdown. Today, Eddie, we took out the Jelly Bean, the Monarch, and the Quartz and hit them side by side to see if indeed you can tell a difference in the sweet spot between the three.
And we put it up against our old friend, the Prism Flash.
Prism Flash, yes, that's right. And then I've got a deep dive, got some X-ray photos to examine, and then Q&A. So let's jump into it, buddy.
Think we can do it in less than 2 hours?
It's not such a stacked card today. I think we're going to get finished in under an hour. That's my prediction. It is 5:18 right now.
Let's go.
All right, latest news, gear gossip. The new Lifetime balls. So they introduced them to the Lifetime facilities in our area at least. And we hit with them indoors, and today we're hitting outdoors. And so impressions, Eddie. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, it's a two-piece ball. So that's a little bit different.
Two-piece welded construction.
Yeah.
Which is not typically, the high-end balls. The high-end balls are usually
So
molded.
do they do that for budget reasons?
Well, they are cheaper to make.
Yeah.
I know that much. But also I think the idea is that if it hits on the seam, it's going to have a funny bounce versus, a solid mold. Mm-hmm. So anyway, what are your thoughts?
I actually like it. I was pleasantly surprised. I was expecting some, the usual stuff you get from these fly-by-night balls.
Right.
Lifetime's not a fly-by-night company, but they're certainly new to the ball business.
Sure.
But, we played hard at it all day, and no out-of-roundness, no cracks, no squishy spots. Mm-mm. Super consistent. I'm impressed.
Yeah, I am too. I was not expecting to like it. I looked at it, and I saw the seam, and I was like, oh, man. It's just some gimmicky ball with 8 extra holes. But played indoor, and it played well. Played several games yesterday. Today we played several games outside with some pretty hard hitters. Not once did we get a funny bounce. I mean, it had the consistency of a Franklin. I'd say it's a little stiffer than a Franklin, a little faster are my initial impressions. Haven't hit them side by side.
It feels a lot like a Franklin. Maybe a skosh heavier in feel.
Yeah. But yeah, so far good ball. Like I am not complaining. It didn't crack. That's the same ball we played with for 2 days now. It didn't go out of round at all. And I don't know. It looks like it's spinning faster, but it might just be by virtue of having more holes. You're used to seeing fewer holes spin. You see more holes spin.
I did not realize it had more holes. 48 holes.
48 holes.
Nice.
But it's not, so the USAP equipment guidelines says up to 40 holes on balls. So it's not USAP approved. So you won't be playing with that in the USAP
Why would they make a
tournaments.
ball that's not?
I don't know. I mean, I suppose maybe they want to change the rules. But I don't know. I mean, the advertisement says the 48 holes are for ball flight consistency of bounce. I mean, yes, it does feel very consistent, and the bounce is consistent. I don't know if it's because of the holes, maybe, but good ball otherwise.
Yeah, they're still a little hard to find. I had to kind of confiscate this one surreptitiously.
One ended up in my bag. I don't know how.
Yeah.
And we played with it today.
But they're going to be selling them at the Lifetime cafes, and I assume in some other format. But I like it.
Well done, Lifetime. And speaking of balls, now we have close call replay at PPA and MLP, and which is great. Have you seen the replays now? Yep. Oh yeah, so much better. So 240 frames per second
makes all the difference.
Dedicated cameras on the lines. You're just like, wow. There's no guesswork anymore. Well, kind of. So now the rule is, now that we can actually see the ball in high resolution at high frame rates, what is an out ball? And they made this 75% rule, which requires that to call a ball out, more than 75% of the ball has to be outside of the line. Now, I think most of us have been going by, where is the bottom of the ball touching? Is it on the line or not? But they did this, I think, because balls do compress. And, we've seen that in the slow motion videos that Chris and Isaac are putting out from, I think it's 20,000 frames per second at Pickleball Studio. They actually had one of the ball bouncing. And if you really slam the ball, it does compress on the ground. It's not, a stiff plastic ball in slow motion. But I'd say the majority of balls aren't going to be compressing to any great extent. But what they did is assuming that every ball compresses about the size of a dime, so the bottom of the ball is going to be flat like a dime. And they're assuming that, so they want to make sure that they're not calling balls out that could potentially be in if the bottom of the ball is flat. Anyway, so the new rule again, greater than 75% of the ball must be outside the line. And that includes the portion of the ball that's not on the ground at all. So if you're looking at the circumference of the ball, part of that ball is going to be over the line if it's really close. And this led to some really seemingly strange line calls at MLP New York City last weekend, where, somebody called the ball out and it looked clearly out in real life. Then they did the slow motion replay and it looked well out, and they called it in anyway because it's just a smidgen less than 75% of the ball was outside of the line.
And the cameras on this close call replay system are looking more or less vertically top down.
Well, straight down the line.
Right.
Right.
So they're not the cameras aren't really able to see the contact patch of the ball to the ground.
Not really.
And that's the reason for this, right?
Yeah. I'll put a screenshot of one particular call that I was just talking about, where it's called in, and it clearly looks out. You can see the bottom of the ball is not compressed. It's kind of a sideways angle, so you can kind of see, and the bottom of the ball is not on the line, but part of the ball overlaps the line.
Sure.
Anyway, I don't mind the rule. It's going to take some readjustment because that is tournament out all day long. And they called it in. So, if I would legitimately call that ball out even in rec play. But now, I kind of like the idea of using this because it's going to force people to be a little less stringent on the out calls. If you
and to be clear, the players and the on-court refs, they're not trying to apply this 25% rule.
It's only if it goes to
in real time.
Right.
It's only in replay.
Yeah, kind of. I imagine that players now are like, well, if I call a ball out that looks kind of out, it's probably going to be in. So they're probably going to eventually get to the place where they're not.
That's tough in real time, and we've all been a part of those, and they're flying by those balls to be able to look at something and make a judgment as to what percentage.
For sure. I remember watching PPA back when I first started playing, and there were a few really bad line calls, and I was like, what a horrible person to make such a bad out call. And it was like they were looking straight down on the ball. Uh-huh. And I was like, man, it seemed like they were intentionally calling an end ball out because they were looking straight at it. But it's really hard to tell, especially when you're looking down on the ball, right? Because it goes so fast and your eyes.
Everybody thinks they're better than the other guy at making those calls.
Yeah, and then having video to watch now that, I generally tend to be too lenient with my out calls, but there have been a few calls I was like really certain they were out, and then I saw the video back and I was like, oh, that's a lot closer than I thought.
Mm-hmm. But you and I and everybody else that's watching, for the most part, maybe we have a few pros watching, but for the most part, we should just keep doing what we've always done.
Yeah.
Make sure that there's space in between the ball and the line. You see color.
Yeah, I suppose so. We're not going to be having close call.
There should not be any arguments over this rule in rec play.
In the amateur, rec play especially, right? Right. And speaking of pros watching this, next week, Connor Garnett is going to do a little guest segment on the show. He's interested in doing like the PPA roundup, similar to what we were doing with Chris Cowley a little while ago. And
Do I get the day off?
we're going to test the waters. No, of course not, Eddie. You got to go to your room over here beside the studio. No. Yeah, so we're going to do a little test. We're going to do it record it on Thursday, which is kind of an odd time to record it because it's well after MLP New York City and right before, what's the next PPA tournament? It's like North Carolina or something.
That doesn't sound right.
Somewhere East Coast. But anyway, so we'll talk about probably mostly MLP and maybe his predictions for the upcoming PPA.
This Thursday.
This Thursday, and then we're going to splice it into our next week's video.
Gotcha.
That'd be fun. Connor's such a nice guy. It would be fun to get a pro's perspective. Good times, Eddie. All right, so remember when we were talking about the whole leaked Selkirk letters? Mm-hmm. And Selkirk really lambasted the UPA and PPL for shoddy practices, et cetera. And at that time, I was like, one of my conclusions was UPA should have never approved any paddles. So at that time, they had just approved the JOOLA 3S, which is still the only UPA-approved paddle. And I was like, they should have never done this if they didn't have a book of regulations for equipment regulations. Well, there's one out there now. And apparently it was published like the day of that podcast. I went back and looked at the date. And this is for the interim program. So it's not going to be their exit velocity test that they'll be rolling out whenever it's finished. But it's all the things we talked about on the interim thing. But there's a little more detail fleshed out in that document. It's like a PowerPoint
guessing
document.
deflection is one of them.
Deflection, is one of them. And it shows, I won't get too in the weeds. So we've talked about it quite a bit on this, but they do a deflection differently than USAP. So they keep putting weights on until it deflects a certain amount. And that is at about the thickness of a penny is the deflection. So it's, 0.0625 inches or 1.6 millimeters. So it does, and the rule is with that deflection is the acceptable deflection force, or ADF is what they're looking for. It has to be at least 48 pounds of weight put on the paddle for it to deflect that, nearly 2 millimeters at room temperature. And then they have different regulations for hot temperatures, 100 degrees and above, that sort of thing.
And is that multiple points on the paddle face?
It could be. I think they do a couple in the center, and then they said they have the right to do it anywhere on the paddle. And the bars, so it sits on this frame, and the bars I think are 6 inches apart. I'm pretty sure it's 6 inches. It's not as close as I thought. So, that's what's covering most of the paddle face, and that's causing a deflection. Spin tests. There's kind of some details on the spin test. So. They're firing a ball with a cannon at 40 miles per hour at a clamped paddle with 3 degrees. So there's 25 degrees, 30 degrees, and 35 degrees. And then measuring spin, and they say that the spin cannot exceed 22 RPM at any angle over an average of 5 hits.
2,200.
2,200 RPM, what did I say?
22. It's very slow. That's like my drive.
That seems more correct, though, 22 than 2,200, because I don't know. I think I'm going to go test this in my garage, like clamp a paddle at around 25 degrees and fire my ball cannon at it. My lobster, it's not a real ball cannon, but and set it at 40 miles per hour and just see what kind of spin like a really spinny paddle gets. Like any of these raw carbon fiber, they get over 2,000 RPM. I don't think it's going to be anywhere close to 2,200 RPM. Like 40 miles per hour at a stationary paddle, that stationary paddle is going to absorb most of the ball, and I can't imagine it's going to generate, because to get 2,200 RPM, you really got to whip your paddle, into the ball. I don't know. We'll see. So, anywho, average spin of 5 trials over each one. Yeah. All right. So, Eddie also mentioned the cost.
So, 2,200 then is our magic number.
Well,
at least
with
for their
that
test.
method. Yeah, with that method. I imagine, I don't know what it's going to translate to how we're measuring as paddle reviewers.
And is that clamp like completely fixed, or is there any given that?
It doesn't say. They did make some reference to equipment manufacturers for the ball cannon and that sort of thing. So that's kind of cool. Yeah. So you can go look that up. It's out there on their website, UPA website. Shall we jump into paddles of the week?
Yeah. It's always my favorite part.
Let's talk about Anna first. So, you and I have already talked about the 3S models. At that time, we talked about it on last week's pod. We did not have the Anna Bright 14 millimeter Scorpeus, which came in the mail shortly after that. So we both got a chance to hit with it. You hit with it just today, Eddie. What are your thoughts?
No, I like it. I like the previous version out of the bunch, the best of the series. This one is at or near the top of my favorite of the new JOOLAs. Mm-hmm. I should prefer the feel of the Colin Johns coming off the face. Mm-hmm. I wish the handle on the Colin Johns was this handle, the one that's a little bit skinnier, I guess. But yeah, these two Scorpeus shapes are definitely at the top of my list. How about you?
I agree with you that in general, these 3Ss are stiffer than the Gen 3s and the Mod TA15. And I'd say they're stiffer than a lot of paddles out there, even Gen 2 paddles. So I'm debating between the Colin Johns and the Anna Bright as my favorite of all of the 3Ss. But the Anna Bright is pretty jarring. I ended up putting quite a bit of lead tape or the tungsten tape going all the way up the sides, and that muted the response a little bit. I just did not like the feel of the paddle without any weight. It felt very jarring. The vibrations were kind of harsh. But, I mean, as expected, it plays poppier than the Colin Johns with a little less plow through, a little less power with fuller swings, but very offensive at the kitchen. Better hand speed. And I agree with you on the handle, too. I do like the thinner handle. But like I said, I need more playtime with both the Anna and the Colin to figure out which one is my favorite. But definitely this Scorpeus shape is my favorite of the bunch.
Yeah, I noticed you have a lot of weight on there.
Yeah. Yeah, you played with it today. It doesn't feel too heavy. I haven't even measured the swing weight. I imagine it's getting close to 120 at this point.
It's getting there.
Yeah.
Getting a little unwieldy, but for the most part, I think your description of jarring is apt. Mm. I didn't feel that with the Colin Johns. It felt as more plush than this, I guess you could say.
For sure.
Not a plush paddle by any means, but more so than this model.
Yeah. I just recorded the full review of the 3Ss. I'm going to release that by the end of the week, this week. Yeah. Right. And I think these are the best paddles that JOOLA's released yet. And we'll get into some of the X-ray business in a second. But they're going to be more durable. My fears of core crushing are subsided a bit with the 3Ss compared to the Gen 3s and the Mod TA15s, and heck, even the Gen 2 JOOLA line of Perseus, Scorpeus, and Hyperion, for reasons we'll talk about in a second. And they're more muted. They're closer to the Paddletech Bantams than they are to the Gearbox Pro Powers, for example. Gearbox Pro Power and the Gen 3s are right together in terms of power. And they do break in a little bit, and the Colin Johns I've been playing with the most probably has 12 hours of play by now, and it's not yet at the Gen 3 level. I don't know when it's going to stop, but it's still more subdued than a brand new Gen 3. So I'm digging these. I think, like I said, they're JOOLA's best offering to date.
So best performance, durability.
Yeah.
Quality.
I think it strikes a good balance between power and control. They're clearly power paddles, but the control, the sweet spots on these are pretty wide. I'd say bigger than average.
Yep.
On paddles as a whole. Not quite as big as I'd say as the Gen 3s, but nevertheless large. And you do get the good power output.
So if you did not have access to these, you're ready to put your cash down on it?
Yeah, $280 is a big ask.
Yeah.
But it is, you can't, if you want this technology, this propulsion core, I guess they have a right to charge that much because that's the only paddles out there that have it.
So if you've got cash for one paddle in the high twos, is it this or is it the Rhombus?
Ooh.
Question of the week.
Questions. Oh, man, the Rhombus is hotter for sure. Sweet spot's larger. I don't know. Right now it's the Rhombus. If the Rhombus gets much hotter, then it'd probably be the 3S. However, I've been playing the heck out of my Rhombus R2, and it is, I'd say it's probably at Gen 3 levels right now, but my hope is that's where it's going to stop with the break-in period. It's not going to, if it doesn't break. So Chris's and Isaac's R1 broke or became too hot to play, above gearbox level is I think what they're describing it as now. I haven't noticed that at all with this one, the Rhombus that I've been playing with. It's solid. How about yours? How's it holding up?
It's holding up just fine. Maybe a slight bit of break-in, but nothing extreme like others have reported on a limited basis from what I'm hearing.
Okay.
And now I'm well into it, probably 20 plus hours with it. Not as much time on the Scorpeus. I'm curious to see where this one ends up following break-in. So before I spend my money, I'm going to have to wait and see.
Yeah. Yeah. But short answer to your question, Rhombus.
Yeah, I would say so for now.
Nice. All right. Well, we also pitted some budget paddles against each other. We've talked about these budget paddles all before, but separately in different podcasts. So we wanted to see if the 6.0 Quartz, which is a Gen 1 paddle without edge foam, had how to compare in general to the Monarch Jelly Bean and the Vatic Prism Flash. And in particular, is there a noticeable difference in the sweet spot? So,
yes.
Yeah, I was surprised too. I mean, when you actually hit them side by side, there's a clear difference.
We're missing one, aren't we?
No, we got these three. Jelly Bean, Vatic Prism Flash, Monarch.
Okay.
Yeah. So you and I played a game. You started with the Quartz. I started with the Monarch. We switched paddles at 6. This is a game of doubles. I was hitting with the Monarch and the Jelly Bean, and I was like, man, this is a little more powerful than I remember playing with. Because
Which, the Jelly Bean?
The Jelly Bean.
Yeah.
With full swings. It's nice and soft and plush. The control is there all day. But with full swings, I was like, some of the serves, I was like, whoa, I'm getting pretty good power. And drives, and I think it's that layer of fiberglass in the layup. Now, clearly, it's not a power paddle. It's control all day, but I'd say control leaning into the all-court category because of that power.
Agree.
And sweet spot felt great. Then we switched paddles, and the Quartz, not a bad paddle by any means. I think for $90, great paddle. Not as big of a sweet spot as especially the Jelly Bean.
Yep.
The Jelly Bean. Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. I mean, look at the width difference. There's a good bit of space in there.
Right.
Makes sense.
Makes sense. Your same perception. Did you notice the power in the Jelly Bean?
Oh yeah, okay. The Quartz I couldn't extract any power out of it. Really, it's a great control paddle. Nothing wrong with that for $90 or what is it?
$90.
Yeah. But the Monarch for all court is pretty amazing, and the sweet spot, just like the other models in the Monarch line, humongous. And this isn't even weighted up with any kind of lead or anything, and there's probably room for lead.
Yeah,
on there
for sure. Now, the more apt comparison, apples to apples, or Jelly Beans to Quartz, would be these two because they are roughly the same width. Did you notice a difference in sweet spot between these two?
I'd have to give it to the Vatic again. Slightly bigger sweet spot. They kind of feel the same in terms of plushness, that softness, that control. But again, I have to give the Vatic Flash marks for the sweet spot.
Yeah, me too. There was a noticeable difference to me. And again, not bashing on the Quartz. Like I said, great paddle for $90. If I had to choose between this and the other two paddles, I would choose the Monarch Jelly Bean first, the Vatic Prism Flash second, and the Quartz.
It's amazing how that Flash has held up. And I played it for a little bit today, and that paddle in particular has probably been through 20 people's hands at this point. It's got smudge marks all over it. It's been beaten to heck, and it still is, it's still as good as the day it came out of the box.
Yeah. That's true. This has made the rounds. It's a very popular paddle. I mean, it's been played so much that there's one of our friends, I think it's Ben Campbell, has a two-handed backhand with his finger right here. And he just kind of holds his paddle like that for the most part. You can actually see where his finger wore through the peel play. It's got so much use on it. But it still gets, good spin.
Decent spin. But yeah, I agree with you. The Monarch Jelly Bean, if I'm going to buy one of these three.
Yeah.
I just love that big sweet spot on all the Monarch paddles.
It is a fantastic budget
twist
paddle.
weights are just up there,
world,
high 7s, low 8s with some lead.
Yeah.
It's really fantastic.
For sure. Eddie, we've got one more paddle to talk about. I'll give these to you.
Thank you, sir.
And
This was a surprise.
Selkirk released this paddle actually is released today. So by the time this podcast is published, unless a miracle happens and I get it out tonight, it'll be tomorrow. This will be a one-day-old paddle on their website.
It's cool looking.
So this is the Vanguard Pro, and this is the Invicta shape. This is the only shape I got from them. But this is, well, first of all, it's a paddle manufactured in China and assembled in the USA, which doesn't, there's a little stamp here, assembled in the USA. That doesn't mean much. I think it means they put the grip on.
Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's an edge guard in the grip, but the materials are coming from China. That's not a bad thing. I think China gets a bad rap. I mean, there's a lot of innovation that goes on there. Yes, it gets a little crazy sometimes, like the whole recent titanium thing. But it's is it 12K carbon fiber cloth?
Yep.
And there's 4 sheets on each side of the woven 12K carbon fiber. So it's not a 12K on top and then 3 layers of unidirectional pre-preg on the bottom. It's each one of those is a 12K sheet. And you can see it's a checkerboard effect, and it's bidirectional instead of triaxial. Triaxial is like the Cubert look, that the shapeshifter has. This one, just looks like a checkerboard, but it looks cool. And that alone, that layup of 4 layers of woven cloth, as far as I know, that hasn't been done before, and it has a very unique play style. It's all thermoformed. So a thermoformed elongated paddle, I was expecting to hit maybe the bread and butter filth, It is not a bread and butter filth. This is very much softer, which is expected with 4 layers of woven cloth on each side, and more control oriented, and it's got a really nice feel. And I'd say I haven't been more excited about a Selkirk paddle since the 003, for sure. The Lux was pretty good. I gave the Lux pretty high marks, but it was their 003 in a production model, so it wasn't that exciting to me.
Yeah.
This one, it doesn't do anything amazing. It's an edge. It does have an edge guard, but the edge guard gives it a big sweet spot. I'd say of the Invicta shape, this by far has the biggest sweet spot of any other Selkirk paddle.
If they made this in a wide body, I'd be drooling over it because it exceeded my expectations by quite a bit.
They do have the standard shape,
Yeah,
the S2.
the Epic.
But Epic.
Yeah.
And the S2 has a short handle. That's
Right.
right. So
Yeah.
the Epic would be an option, but it doesn't have a long enough handle
Right.
for your taste.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on it?
Well, presumably they started with something before 4 layers, right? So what is it that 4 layers gives you that 3 doesn't and 5 is too much for?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm sure eventually the weight is an issue.
Yeah.
I haven't done the swing weight measurements. It doesn't feel too head heavy.
No.
Or it feels, under 8 ounces to me. But
I can't think of another paddle, though, that plays quite like this one. It's a little bit like the Lux and the 003, but with more power and pop.
for sure.
Which those two you can't put the ball away with those 2 paddles.
Yeah.
For normal people, such as myself. But this one has a little bit of power when needed. Not a huge amount, but enough to, put an overhead away.
Yeah. And I played a few games with it, and I'm thinking right now I'd place it control all court boundary, It gets good power when you really swing at it. The pop is not it's not a very poppy paddle, which makes for good control. And that really plush feel, the soft feel with the wide sweet spot and more muted response for pop. Really good control on this.
I'd still call it a control paddle, pretty squarely.
Would you?
Yeah.
Like leaning all court or like right in the center of control?
It's probably a control. It's
Okay.
solid control.
All right. Which is interesting because it's thermoformed, but with those 4 layers of 12K carbon fiber,
Maybe
just makes
it's
it softer.
pocketing the ball, just a
Yeah.
smidge more. It does feel like it's grabbing that ball and
For sure.
working it. So
I had fun with it today. Like I went from I played with the Rhombus R2 first game. I played with the, it was the Rhombus R2 straight to this one. And I was like, oh man, this is a soft paddle. But once I hit the ball into the net a couple times and realized the force I needed to put behind the ball, like the kitchen play, I was dialed in so much better than the Rhombus.
Honestly, I have not been even a little bit excited by anything coming out of Selkirk for probably a year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah.
This one's kind of got me on board again.
Yeah, same. I'm pretty happy that, and again, it's not made in the USA, so if that's a huge deal, this is not the paddle for you. But I don't mind that it's made in China. I think the price is up there. I think it's like over $200. So, there could be better options, definitely better options if you're looking for a more powerful paddle in that price range. But for what it is, it's kind of a unique paddle. I haven't really felt one, like you said, that feels quite like this.
Yeah.
And
they've been stuck on those same 3 shapes for forever. If they could bring out one more, I'd be happy.
Give us a hybrid or a wide body standard with a longer handle.
575.
Yeah, made in this, that'd be pretty sweet.
Yeah, I like it.
It does look good too.
Might have to take that one off your hands for a while.
Yeah. So, well done, Selkirk.
Yeah.
Pretty excited that they came out with a paddle that does do it for me. Okay,
Deep dive.
Let's go deep diving. So I've mentioned already, last week I showed some x-rays. I've been going to a chiropractor office who has been allowing me to take x-ray images of paddles. I'm going tomorrow again with a new batch of paddles. But the first batch, I included the JOOLA Mod TA15 and the JOOLA 3S models. And given that I've doing the review of the 3S this week, I also did the old Gen 3s as well. I went back and looked a little closer at the x-ray. So on initial appearance, you can't tell the difference between the 3S in an x-ray versus the original Gen 3 versus the Mod TA15. They all look the same. I was looking mostly at the foam around the perimeter, that interior foam, same thickness, and the polypropylene cells look the same size. But I started looking a little closer, and you can see crushed cells in an x-ray. And the way to identify them, so first of all, let's start with healthy cells. So looking through the paddle, plan view of a paddle, so like looking through the paddle this way, that direction, you can see the polypropylene honeycomb cells. And in a x-ray, the healthier cells are circular or octagonal. The unhealthy crushed cells are actually collapsing in on themselves from the pressure of the surrounding cells, and their cell walls are concave, giving them a star shape. So you've got circle, you've got an octagon, and you've got like a five-pointed star of the crushed cells, and they're really apparent. So you can see on every thermoformed paddle, not just the JOOLAs, I shouldn't say every, I don't know yet, but all the ones I've x-rayed that have edge foam and are thermoformed, the cells right next to the foam are crushed. And that's what turned me on to what a crushed cell looks like, that star shape. Because the foam expands and it pushes into the cells, and once you cut polypropylene and you break that cell into two, it loses its integrity and it squishes. It becomes crushed. So that first layer next to the foam is all squished, and then that layer just beside the second row in from the foam, there's several of those that are also crushed naturally. So I see that in the JOOLAs. I see that in every thermoform paddle that I've looked at. Now that we know that JOOLA, they admitted that they were intentionally crushing their cores in the Gen 3s, the Mod TA15, and their old Gen 2s, so the original Perseus line, Scorpeus line. Now that we know that, I looked at the x-rays a little closer, and there are interior cells within the paddle body that are crushed. I looked and I colored them in, and I counted them up, and on the Scorpeus Gen 3, it was an Anna Bright that I had used maybe for, 4 hours, not very long. So it's not like the use caused this. I think it came from the factory this way, but I think there were 20 cells that were crushed on that, if I remember, close to 20. For the Ben John's Perseus, there were 35, so it was even more of those interior cells were crushed. And I excluded the first 2 rows of cells next to the foam. And then I looked at the new 3Ss, and the 3S Perseus had only three crushed cells total, and the Scorpius had 0. So clearly, they stopped crushing the cores, and that had an effect on what we're seeing in the interior of the paddle. And I've been on record saying this, and I still stand by it. Crushed cores are not necessarily broken cores. They're not necessarily core corrupted yet, but you're losing the integrity of the strength of the cell walls with those ones on the interior that are crushed. And like bad cells in the human body, I think they can spread to cells next to them with repeated use. So imagine a ball hitting that area of the paddle with crushed cells. Those cell walls are compromised, and they spread into the cell walls next to them, and it just creates this domino effect.
Well, it makes sense. A weakened wall is just going to make the wall next to it that much weaker because there's just not that supporting structure.
Yeah. And I did notice that, there are the 3 cells that were crushed on the the 3S Perseus were pretty close to the top of the paddle. They're at that interface where the foam and the polypropylene meet. And, that's where I've suspected that the propulsion cores are most vulnerable to breaking, because that's where the polypropylene is going to be flexing the most because of the nature of that foam. I do trust that the 3Ss are going to be much more durable than the Gen 3s and the mods. But if they're going to break, I think it's going to be in that coming down from like that area of the interface between the polypropylene and the foam, and those cells that are already crushed from cutting or digging out whatever they did to that polypropylene to inject the foam, spreading into the lower end of the face of the paddle.
So you'll be able to show in your review of the 3Ss those crushed cells and what they look like and the differentiation between that and the healthy ones.
Yep. I may put some in the B-roll. Probably will put some in the B-roll too, and I'll discuss it in detail in the 3S review.
Okay. Very interesting, because when I looked at it just at first glance, it looked exactly the same.
Right.
It was a quick view, but still, you really got to get in there to see that kind of damage.
Yeah, for sure. And it makes sense from what I've seen from cutting paddles open also that are core corrupted. Some of the paddles I want to bring tomorrow to get x-rayed are going to be the ones that I did cut open that are severely, disbonded and broken, and just see what they look like. Like, I know what they look like sliced open. The cells are just mush. I'd like to see what the interior of the paddle looks like outside of that cut. Because once you do cut open a paddle, this is something not many people talk about. Once you cut open a paddle, you're compromising the integrity of those cells. And yes, they get squishy even if it's a perfectly fine paddle before you cut it open. So, if you see somebody squishing the profile of the paddle with their fingers and like, oh, this is broken. Well, that can happen to a perfectly good core. Once you cut it open and then you start squeezing it, it's going to start breaking down those cells because the walls are cut open, right? Now, clearly the one I cut open was already compromised. It was crunching when I was pressing it in the center. And so I'm going to take some of those and get them x-rayed and see what that looks like outside of the cut.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Looking forward to seeing those on B-roll.
For sure.
All right, John, we're down to our Q&A already.
We are blasting through this today.
Man, you were right. Less than an hour. So this is from I'm a Husband 809. If you go to a tournament, what 3 paddles do you take with you? And we've talked about, various derivations of this question in the past, but it's always changing because new paddles are coming out. I'm not sure where the number 3 came from, but you want to start with your response to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. So right now, currently, those 3 paddles would be Quartz Shapeshifter. It's been my main for a while. I've been testing so many paddles that I feel like I'm moving away from the Shapeshifter just because I haven't played with it as much recently. Rhombus R2 Ripple and the JOOLA Colin Johns 3S. Those are my 3 paddles right now. And I feel like that covers me from extreme power if I'm feeling loose and aggressive.
And which one is that?
That's the Ripple all day, yeah. And then a little more dialed back would be the Colin John Scorpeus. And then if I want just all-court controllability, right down the middle on everything, it's going to be the Shapeshifter.
All right.
How about you, Eddie?
It's a good choice. I think we have a lot of similarities, a little bit of differences.
All right.
Got my bag right here.
Okay.
And it has 3 sleeves in it, so that's my reason for 3. But yeah, Quartz shapeshifter. This is an all-court beauty right here.
Oh, I like that's the new colorway, the white.
The white, love it. But I would normally start with the rhombus.
Okay.
And I have the R1 here.
Okay. Are you preferring the R1
No,
these days? Okay.
but this is what I have.
That's what's in your
somebody
bag.
took mine. So here we go, R1. If I had an R2, Dong send me an R2, I'd be happy to take that off your hands. But yeah, probably the R2 if I had my druthers.
Okay.
So I would probably start with the R2
Yep.
just to have that bit of power and pop. But if it's not working out for me, then I'll move to the all-court solution.
Mm-hmm.
If that's not working out for me, I'd move to a Monarch all-court.
Oh.
Or
okay.
Monarch control.
Gotcha. So yours are skewed from the top to control, extreme power to solid
really,
control.
it's about forgiveness more than control, I would say.
Right. And mine are more skewed from all court up to the top power.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I like your choices also. I mean, we did not discuss this before, so we did not know what we were going to answer. But yeah, it makes sense. You know, we hit the same paddles a lot, and these are for the most outstanding paddles I think we've hit. The Monarch series, the Shapeshifter, the Rhombus Ripple, and the
But
rest.
if I had a bag with 5 sleeves, I would probably add the Colin Johns.
Okay.
And then maybe that Invicta. The Vanguard Pro.
I think I'm
If
going
I'm in
to...
need of like just a pure control.
Yeah.
That might be the one.
Yeah. Got the link. You know, I haven't reviewed a Selkirk paddle since their first SLK raw carbon fiber.
I thought you did a Power Air, no?
It was no, I didn't ever review that. I talked about it on different reviews.
All right.
I gave the Lux a spot on the control paddle of the year, like 3rd runner up or something last year. But I've never done a full review outside of that SLK, which was over a year ago, and it was a very kind of mediocre review. I think I'd like to give it a little more time with this, and I'm thinking about reviewing it. I'd like to review it.
Well,
give a positive review.
When I'm done with it,
paddle.
I'll give it back to you for the review.
All right, Eddie.
Well, thanks, John.
Yeah. Do you got any plans for the week? Next weekend?
Taking care of my foot still and do a little.
How's it going?
It's going all right. I will say, this is like prime Colorado hiking season, though. So if my foot was better, I'd be doing a little bit more of that because the aspens are out, man.
Yeah.
The color is like just crazy good.
I'd like to give an update on my feet also.
Yes, please.
Not the people were asking, but yeah, I mean, I've been using that Kinneon red light therapy device now, and I'm overdue for a podiatrist visit to get cortisone shots in my feet. And when I reviewed the Kinneon, I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna have to go back to the dermatologist, a podiatrist, to get another shot pretty soon because it's not working as well on my feet. My feet still have pain, but they're not. It's not going up in pain. It's still tolerable. It's not screwing me up on the court. It's not making me grumpy. So far so good. I'm hoping I'm going to get away with not having to go back to
Let's
the
hope so.
podiatrist. Yeah.
So what is making you grumpy?
You, Eddie.
That makes sense. You're not the first person to tell me that today. Well,
Sweet.
thanks, John.
Yeah, sounds good, Eddie.
All
I
right.
will see you on the next one.
Yeah, we'll see y'all.